You should have. I'm sure it's very important. In that case, I'm sure Gildor would have refused to explain it, said Frodo sharply. And now leave me in peace for a bit. I don't want to answer a string of questions while I'm eating. I want to think. Good heavens, said Pippin. At breakfast? He walked away towards the edge of the green. From Frodo's mind, the bright morning, treacherously bright, he thought, had not banished the fear of pursuit. And he pondered the words of Gildor. The merry voice of Pippin came to him. He was running on the green turf and singing. No, I could not, he said to himself. It is one thing to take my young friends walking over the Shire with me until we are hungry and weary, and food and bed are sweet. To take them into exile, where hunger and weariness may have no cure, is quite another, even if they are willing to come. The inheritance is mine alone.
Hey, Pierre, how you doing?
Even to take Sam. He looked at Sam
Definitely appreciate it, brother. You have a good evening.
Well, Sam,
what's up, Miggs?
What about it? I'm leaving the Shire as soon as
Hope
ever
you're
I can.
doing well.
In fact, I've made up my mind now not even to wait a day at Crickhollow, if it can be helped. Very good, sir. You still mean to
Definitely appreciate y'all too stopping by.
It's going to be very dangerous, Sam. It's already dangerous. Most likely, neither of us will come back.
Give me a sec to share this out, and
sir, then I shall. That's certain, said
I'll
Sam.
smoke
Don't
one.
you leave him, they said to me. Leave him, I said. I never mean to. I'm going to stay with him if he climbs to the moon. And if any of those black riders stop him, he'll have
hope all's
Sam
well with
Gamgee
you
to
too,
reckon with,
Pierre.
I said.
You have a good one too.
Who are they? And what are you talking about? The elves, sir. We had some talk last night, and they seemed to know you were going away. So I didn't see the use of denying it. Wonderful folk, elves, sir, wonderful. They are, said Frodo. You like them still, now you have had a closer view? They seem a bit above my likes and dislikes, so to speak, answered Sam slowly. It don't seem to matter what I think about them. They are quite different from what I expected. So old and young and so gay and sad, as it were. Frodo looked at Sam, rather startled, half expecting to see some outward sign of the odd change.
How's your guys' night been and weekend been?
He didn't sound like the voice of the old Sam Gamgee that he'd thought he knew. But it looked like the old Sam Gamgee sitting there, except that his face was unusually thoughtful. Did you feel any need to leave the Shire now that your wish to see them has come true already? He asked. Yes, sir. I don't know how to say it, but after last night I feel...
Oh, yeah, Pierre.
I seem to see ahead in a kind of way. I know we're going to take a very long road into darkness, but I know I can't turn back. It isn't to see elves now, nor dragons, nor mountains that I want. I don't rightly know what I want, but I have something to do before the end, and it lies ahead, not in the Shire. I must see it through, sir, if you understand me. I don't altogether, but I understand that Gandalf chose me a good companion. I'm content. We'll go together. Frodo finished his breakfast in silence. Then, standing up, he looked over the land ahead and called to Pippin. All ready to start, he said as Pippin ran up. We must be getting off at once. We slept late, and there are a good many miles to go. You slept late, you mean, said Pippin. I was up long before, and we're only waiting for you to finish eating and thinking. I've finished both now, and I'm going to make for Bucklebury Ferry as quickly as possible. I'm not going out of the way, back to the road we left last night. I'm going to cut straight across country from here. Then you are going to fly, said Pippin. You won't cut straight on foot anywhere in this country. We can cut straighter than the road anyway, answered Frodo. The ferry is east from Woodhall, but the hard road curves away to the left. You can see a bend a bit away north over there. It goes round the north end of the Marish, so as to strike the causeway from the bridge above Stock. But that is miles out of the way. We could save a quarter of the distance if we made a line for the ferry from where we stand. Shortcuts make long delays, argued Pippin. The country's rough round here, and there are bogs and all kinds of difficulties down in the Marish. I know the land in these parts, and if you are worrying about black riders, I can't see that it's any worse meeting them on a road than in a wood or a field. It's less easy to find people in the woods and fields, answered Frodo, and if you are supposed to be on the road, there's some chance that you will be looked for on the road and not off it. All right, said Pippin. I'll follow you into every bog and ditch, but it's hard. I'd counted on passing the Golden Perch at Stop before sundown. The best beer in the East Farthing, or used to be. It's a long time since I tasted it. That settles it, said Frodo. Shortcuts make delays, but inns make longer ones. At all costs, we must keep you away from the Golden Perch. We want to get to Bucklebury before dark. What do you say, Sam? I'll go along with you, Mr. Frodo, said Sam, in spite of private feeling and a deep regret for the best beer in the East Farthing. Then, if we're going to toil through bog and briar, let's go now, said Pippin. It was already nearly as hot as it had been the day before, but clouds were beginning to come up from the west. It looked like it had turned to rain. The hobbits scrambled down a steep green bank and plunged into the thick trees below. Their course had been chosen to leave Woodhall to their left and to cut slanting through the woods that clustered along the eastern side of the hill until they reached the flats beyond. Then they could make straight for the ferry over country that was open except for a few ditches and fences. Frodo reckoned they had 18 miles to go in a straight line. He soon found that the thicket was closer and more tangled than it had appeared. There were no paths in the undergrowth, and they didn't get on very fast. When they had struggled to the bottom of the bank, they found a stream running down from the hills behind in a deeply dug bed with steep, slippery sides overhung with brambles. Most inconveniently, it cut across the line they had chosen. They couldn't jump over it, nor indeed get across it at all without getting wet, scratched, and muddy. They halted, wondering what to do. First check, said Pippin, smiling grimly. Sam Gamgee looked back. Through an opening in the trees, he caught a glimpse of the top of the green bank from which they had climbed down. Look, he said, clutching Frodo by the arm. They all looked, and on the edge, high above them, they saw against the sky a horse standing. Beside it stood a black figure. They at once gave up any idea of going back. Frodo led the way and plunged quickly into the thick bushes beside the stream. Whew, he said to Pippin. We were both right. The short cut has gone crooked already, but we got under cover only just in time. You've got sharp ears, Sam. Can you hear anything coming? They stood still, almost holding their breath as they listened, but there was no sound of pursuit. I don't fancy he would try bringing his horse down that bank, said Sam, but I guess he knows we came down it. We'd better be going on. Going on was not altogether easy. They had packs to carry, and the bushes and brambles were reluctant to let them through. They were cut off from the wind by the ridge behind, and the air was still and stuffy. When they forced their way at last into more open ground, they were hot and tired and very scratched, and they were also no longer certain of the direction in which they were going. The banks of the stream sank as it reached the levels and became broader and shallower, wandering off towards the Marish and the river. Why, this is the Stock Brook, said Pippin. If we are going to try and get back onto our course, we must cross it once and bear right. They waded the stream and hurried over a wide open space, rush-grown and treeless, on the further side. Beyond that they came again to a belt of trees, tall oaks for the most part, with here and there an elm tree or an ash. The ground was fairly level, and there was little undergrowth, but the trees were too close for them to see far ahead. The leaves blew upwards in sudden gusts of wind, and spots of rain began to fall from the overcast sky. Then the wind died away, and the rain came streaming down. They trudged along as fast as they could, over patches of grass and through thick drifts of old leaves, and all about them the rain pattered and trickled. They didn't talk, but kept glancing back and from side to side. After half an hour, Pippin said, I hope we haven't turned too much toward the south and are not walking longwise through this wood. It's not a very broad belt. I should have said no more than a mile at the widest, and we ought to have been through it by now. It's no good our starting to go in zigzags, said Frodo. That won't mend matters. Let's keep on as we're going.
1 second, everyone.
I want to come out into the open yet. They went on for perhaps another couple of miles. Then the sun gleamed out of ragged clouds again, and the rain lessened. It was now past midday, and they felt it was high time for lunch. They halted under an elm tree. Its leaves, though fast turning yellow, were still thick, and the ground at its feet was fairly dry and sheltered. When they came to make their meal, they found that the elves had filled their bottles with a pale golden in color. It had the scent of a honey.
Hey, Soy, how you doing?
And was wonderfully
Just in time for me to about to do a dab.
And snapping their fingers at rain and at black riders. The last
How you been doing, Soy?
Would soon be behind them. Frodo propped his back against the tree trunk and closed his eyes. Sam and Pippin sat near, and they began to hum, and then to sing softly. Ho, 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 to the bottle I go, to heal my heart and drown my woe. Rain may fall and wind may blow, and many miles be still to go. But under a tall tree I will lie, and let the clouds go sailing by. Ho, 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 they began again louder. They stopped short suddenly. Frodo sprang to his feet. A long-drawn wail came down the wind, like the cry of some evil and lonely creature. It rose and fell and ended on a high, piercing note. Even as they sat and stood, as if suddenly frozen, it was answered by another cry, fainter and further off, but no less chilling to the blood. There was then a silence, broken only by the sound of the wind in the leaves. And what do you think that was?
Oh, yeah, safety meeting.
Trying to speak lightly, but quavering a little. It was a bird. It was one that I've never heard in the Shire before. It was not bird or beast, said Frodo. It was a call, or a signal. There were words in that cry, though I could not catch them. No hobbit has such a voice. No more was said about it. They were all thinking of the riders, but no one. They were now reluctant either to stay or go on, but sooner or later they had got to get across the country to the ferry, and it was best to go sooner and in daylight. In a few moments they had shouldered their packs again and were off. Before long the wood came to a sudden white grassland before them. They now saw that they had in fact turned too much to the south. Away over the flat they could glimpse the low hill of Bucklebury across the river, but it was now to their
now time for the
creeping cautiously
self-clean mode.
They set off across the open as quickly as they could. At first they felt afraid, away from the shelter of the wood. Far back behind them stood the high place where they had breakfasted. Frodo half expected to see the small horseman on the ridge dark against the sky, but there was no sign of one. The sun on the breaking clouds, as it sank towards the hills they had left, was now shining brightly again. Their fear left them, though they still.
Thanks, Soy.
The land became steadily.
It's the one that I won at the tattoo convention, Dr. Dabber.
There were hedges and gates and dikes for drainage.
Cause I could switch it from like what I just did, smoking some wax out of it or concentrates, to flipping the button the other way, and I'm able to smoke flower out of it. And it gives me a whole nother bucket to use too.
Beyond it, a rutted lane ran between low, well-laid hedges towards a distant clump of trees. Pippin stopped.
Before tax, it runs either in the store or turn it off. Either in the store or through the website. Before tax, they run about $375, $370 before tax.
He's a good friend to all
and
of course,
I got it for a $10 raffle ticket.
Dogs, but after all, folk die down here and near the border and have to be more on their guard. I know, said Frodo, but all the same, he added with a shamefaced laugh, I'm terrified of him and his dogs. I've avoided his farm for years and years. He caught me several times trespassing after mushrooms when I was a youngster at Brandy Hall. On the last occasion he beat me and then took me and showed me to his dogs. See, lads, he said, next time this young varmint sets foot on my land, you can eat him. Now see him off. And pushed me all the way to the ferry. Over the fright, though I dare say the beasts knew their business and wouldn't really have touched me. Pippin laughed. Well, it's time you made it up.
But yeah, I can't beat it for the price.
Oh, man, it is really a tough fellow if you leave his mushrooms alone. Let's get into the lane, and then we shan't be trespassing. If we meet him, I'll do the talking. He's a friend of Mary's, and I used to come here with him a good deal.
I do go through my wax a lot quicker.
Until they saw the thatched roofs of
Definitely go through my wax a lot quicker.
Farm buildings peeping out among the trees ahead. The maggots and the puddyfoots of stock, and most of the inhabitants of the manor were house dwellers, and his farm was stoutly built of brick and had a high wall all around it. There was a wide wooden gate opening out of the wall into the lane. Suddenly, as they drew nearer, a terrific baying and barking broke out.
That was definitely
a loud voice was heard.
It definitely gives nice rips.
Bang! Whoa! Come on, lads! Frodo and Sam stopped dead, but Pippin walked on a few paces. The gate opened, and 3 huge dogs came pelting out into the lane.
And I still got
the travelers, barking
the oldie but goodie.
They took no notice of Pippin, but Sam shrank.
See, with this one,
while 2 wolvish
my wax lasted a lot longer. With that one, not so much.
The most ferocious of the 3 halted in front of Frodo, bristling and growling. Through the gate there now appeared a broad, thick-set hobbit with a round red face. Hello, hello, and who may you be, and what may you be wanting? He asked. Good afternoon, Mr. Maggot, said Pippin. The farmer looked at him closely. Well, if it isn't Master Pippin, Mr. Peregrine Took, I should say, he cried, changing from a scowl to a grin. It's a long time since I saw you round here. It's lucky for you that I know you. I was just going out to set my dogs on any street.
A bowl with some roachweed.
There are some funny things going on today. Of course, we do get queer folk wandering in these parts at times, too near the river, he said, shaking his head. But this fellow was the most outlandish I've ever set eyes on. He won't without leave a second time, not if I can stop him. What fellow do you mean? Asked Pippin. Then you haven't seen him, said the farmer. He went up the lane toward the causeway not a long while back. He was a funny customer and asking funny questions. But perhaps you'll come along inside and we'll pass the news more comfortable. I've a drop of good ale on tap, if you and your friends are willing, Mr. Took. It seemed plain that the farmer would tell them more if allowed to do it in his own time and fashion, so they all accepted the invitation. What about the dogs? Asked Frodo anxiously. The farmer laughed. They won't harm you, not unless I tell them to. Here, Grip.
Oh yeah, some of them are pretty,
he cried.
Some, whatchamacallit,
To the relief of Frodo and Sam, the dogs walked away and let them
some
go.
roachweed will definitely, get you more stoned than what it did to begin with.
Baggins, he said. You may not remember him.
Mainly because it's just all nice and,
At the name, Baggins
resonated.
and gave Frodo a sharp glance. For a moment, Frodo thought that the memory of stolen mushrooms had been aroused, and that the dogs would be told to see him off. But Farmer Maggot took him by the arm. Well, if that isn't queerer than ever, he exclaimed. Mr. Baggins, is it? Come inside. We must have a talk. They went into the farmer's kitchen and sat by the wide fireplace. Mrs. Maggot brought out beer in a huge jug and filled 4 large mugs. It was a good brew, and
but there's some of the bowls that I get that
missing the golden perch. Sam sipped his beer
I'll top the bowl with some wax.
The inhabitants of other parts of the Shire, and also he was not disposed to be quick friends with anyone who had beaten his master, however long ago. After a few remarks about the weather and the agricultural prospects, which were no worse than usual, Farmer Maggot put down his mug and looked at them all in turn. "Now, Mr. Peregrine," he said, "where might you be coming from, and where might you be going to? Were you coming to visit me? For if so, you'd gone past my gate without my seeing you." "Well, no," answered Pippin. "To tell you the truth, since you guessed it, we got into the lane from the other end. We'd come over your fields, but that was quite by accident. We lost our way in the woods, back near Woodhall, trying to take a short-cut to the ferry." "If you were in a hurry, the road would have served you better," said the farmer. "But I wasn't worrying about that. You have leave to walk over my land, if you have a mind, Mr. Peregrine. And you, Mr. Baggins, though I dare say you still like mushrooms." He laughed. "Ah, yes, I recognise the name. I recollect the time when young Frodo Baggins was one of the worst young rascals of Buckland. But it wasn't mushrooms I was thinking of. I had just heard the name Baggins before you turned up. What do you think that funny customer asked me?" They waited anxiously for him to go on. "Well," the farmer continued, approaching his point with slow relish, "he came riding on a big black horse in at the gate, which happened to be open, and right up to my door. All black he was himself, too, and cloaked and hooded up, as if he didn't want to be known. Now, what in the Shire can he want? I thought to myself. We don't see many of the big folk over the border, and anyway, I'd never heard of any like this black fellow. 'Good day to you,' I says, going out to him. 'This lane don't lead anywhere, and wherever you may be going, your quickest way will be back to the road.' I didn't like the looks of it, and when Rip came out, he took one sniff and let out a yelp as if he'd been stung. He put down his tail and bolted off howling. The black fellow sat quite still. 'I come from yonder,' he said, slow and stiff-like, pointing back west over my fields, if you please. 'Have you seen Baggins?' he asked in a queer voice, and bent low towards me. I couldn't see any face, for his hood fell down so low, and I felt a sort of shiver down my back. But I didn't see why he should come riding over my land so bold. 'Be off,' I said. 'There are no Bagginses here. You're in the wrong part of the Shire. You'd better go back west to Hobbiton, but you can go by road this time.' 'Baggins has left,' he answered in a whisper. 'He's coming. He's not far away. I wish to find him. If he passes, will you tell me? I will come back with gold.' 'No, you won't,' I said. 'You'll go back where you belong, double quick. I give you 1 minute before I call all my dogs.' He gave a sort of hiss. It might have been laughing, and it might not. Then he spurred his great horse right at me, and I jumped out of the way only just in time. I called the dogs, but he swung off and rode through the gate and up the lane toward the causeway like a bolt of thunder. What do you think of that?" Frodo sat for a moment looking at the fire, but his only thought was how on earth would they reach the ferry. "I don't know what to think," he said at last. "Then I'll tell you what to think," said Maggot. "You should never have gone mixing up yourself with Hobbiton folk, Mr. Frodo. Folk are queer up there." Sam stirred in his chair and looked at the farmer with an unfriendly eye. "But you were always a reckless lad. When I heard you had left the Brandybucks and gone off to that old Mr. Bilbo, I said that you were going to find trouble. Mark my words, there's all comes of them strange doings of Mr. Bilbo's. His money was got in some strange fashion in foreign parts, they say. Maybe there's some that want to know what has become of the gold and jewels that he buried in the hill of Hobbiton, as I hear." Frodo said nothing. The shrewd guesses of the farmer were rather disconcerting. "Well, Mr. Frodo," Maggot went on, I'm glad that you've had the sense to come back to Buckland. My advice is stay here and don't get mixed up with those outlandish folk. You'll have friends in these parts. If any of these black fellas come after you again, I'll deal with them. I'll say you're dead, or have left the Shire, or anything you like. And that might be true enough, for as like as not, it's old Mr. Bilbo they want news of. Maybe you're right, said Frodo, avoiding the farmer's eye and staring at the fire. Maggot looked at him thoughtfully. Well, I see you have ideas of your own, he said. It's as plain as my nose that no accident brought you and that rider here on the same afternoon, and maybe my news was no great news to you after all. I'm not asking you to tell me anything you have in mind to keep to yourself, but I see you're in some kind of trouble. Perhaps you're thinking it won't be too easy to get to the ferry without being caught. I was thinking so, said Frodo, but we've got to try and get there, and it won't be done by sitting and thinking. So I'm afraid we must be going. Thank you very much indeed for your kindness. I've been in terror of you and your dogs for over 30 years, Farmer Maggot. Though you may laugh to hear it, it's a pity, for I've missed a good friend. And now I'm sorry to leave so soon. But I'll come back, perhaps, one day, if I get a chance. You will be welcome when you come, said Maggot. But now I've a notion. It's near sundown already, and we're going to have our supper. For we mostly go to bed soon after the sun. If you and Mr. Peregrine and all could stay and have a bite with us, we would be pleased. And so should we, said Frodo. But we must be going at once, I'm afraid. Even now it will be dark before we can reach the ferry. Ah, but wait a minute. I was going to say, after a bit of supper, I'll get out a small wagon and I'll drive you on to the ferry. That will save you a good step, and it might also save you trouble of another sort. Frodo now accepted the invitation gratefully, to the relief of Pippin and Sam. The sun was already behind the western hills, and the light was failing. Two of Maggot's sons and his 3 daughters came in, and a generous supper was laid on the large table. The kitchen was lit with candles, and the fire was mended. Mrs. Maggot bustled in and out. 1 or 2 other hobbits belonging to the farm household came in. In a short while, 14 sat down to eat. There was beer in plenty, and a mighty dish of mushrooms and bacon, besides much other solid farmhouse fare. The dogs lay by the fire and gnawed rinds and cracked bones. When they'd finished, the farmer and his sons went out with a lantern and got the wagon ready. It was dark in the yard when the guests came out. They threw their packs on board and climbed in. The farmer sat in the driving seat and whipped up his 2 stout ponies. His wife stood in the light.
Oh, yeah, so you have a good one. And definitely appreciate you stopping by.
She called. Don't go arguing with any foreigners and come straight back. I will, said he, and drove out of the gate. There was now no breath of wind stirring. The night was still and quiet, and a chill was in the air. They went without lights and took it slowly. After a mile or 2, the lane came to an end, crossing a deep dike and climbing a short slope up onto the high-banked causeway. Maggot got down and took a good look either way, north and south, but nothing could be seen in the darkness, and there was not a sound in the still air. Thin strands of river mist were hanging above the dikes and crawling over the fields. It's going to be thick, said Maggot, but I'll not light my lanterns till I turn for home. We'll hear anything on the road long before we meet it tonight. It was 5 miles or more from Maggot's Lane to the ferry. The hobbits wrapped themselves up, but their ears were strained for any sound above the creak of the wheels and the slow clop of the ponies' hoofs. The wagon seemed slower than a snail to Frodo. Beside him, Pippin was nodding towards sleep, but Sam was staring forwards into the rising fog. They reached the entrance to the ferry lane at last. It was marked by 2 tall white posts that suddenly loomed up on their right. Farmer Maggot drew in his ponies, and the wagon creaked to a halt. They were just beginning to scramble out when suddenly they heard what they had all been dreading. Hoofs on the road ahead. The sound was coming towards them. Maggot jumped down and stood holding the ponies' heads, peering forward into the gloom. Click-clop, click-clop came the approaching rider. The fall of the hoofs sounded loud in the still, foggy air. "You'd better be hidden, Mr. Frodo," said Sam anxiously. "You get down in the wagon and cover up with blankets, and we'll send this rider to the right-abouts." He climbed out and went to the farmer's side. Black riders would have to ride over him to get near the wagon. Click-clop, click-clop. The rider was nearly on them. "Hello there," cried Farmer Maggot. The advancing hoofs stopped short. They thought they could dimly guess a dark, cloaked shape in the mist, a yard or two ahead. "Now then," said the farmer, throwing the reins to Sam and striding forward. "Don't you come a step nearer. What do you want, and where are you going?" "I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?" But the voice was the voice of Merry Brandybuck. The lantern was uncovered, and its light astonished the face of the farmer. "Mr. Merry!" he cried. "Yes, of course. Who did you think it was?" said Merry, coming forward. As he came out of the mist and their fears subsided, he seemed suddenly to diminish to ordinary hobbit size. He was riding a pony, and a scarf was swathed round his neck and over his chin to keep out the fog. Frodo sprang out of the wagon to greet him. "So there you are at last," said Merry. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd turn up at all today, and I was just going back to supper. When it grew foggy, I came across and rode up towards Stock to see if you'd fallen in any ditches. But I'm blessed if I know which way you've come. Where did you find them, Mr. Maggot? In your duck pond?" "No, I caught them trespassing," said the farmer, "and nearly set my dogs on 'em. But they'll tell you all the story, I've no doubt. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Merry and Mr. Frodo and all, I'd best be turning for home. Mrs. Maggot will be worriting with the night getting thick." He backed the wagon into the lane and turned it. "Well, good night to you all," he said. "It's been a queer day and no mistake. But all's well as ends well, though perhaps we should not say that until we reach our own doors. I'll not deny that I'll be glad now when I do." He lit his lanterns and got up. Suddenly he produced a large basket from under the seat. "I was nearly forgetting," he said. "Mrs. Maggot put this up for Mr. Baggins with her compliments." He handed it down and moved off, followed by a chorus of thanks and good nights. They watched the pale rings of light round his lanterns as they dwindled into the foggy night. Suddenly Frodo laughed. From the covered basket he held, the scent of mushrooms was rising. Chapter 5. A Conspiracy Unmasked. "Now we'd better get home ourselves," said Merry. "There's something funny about all this, I see, but it must wait till we get in." They turned down the ferry lane, which was straight and well kept, and edged with large whitewashed stones. In 100 yards or so it brought them to the river bank, where there was a broad wooden landing stage. A large flat ferry boat was moored beside it. The white bollards near the water's edge glimmered in the light of 2 lamps on high posts. Behind them the mists in the flat fields were now above the hedges, but the water before them was dark, with only a few curling wisps like steam among the reeds by the bank. There seemed to be less fog on the further side. Merry led the pony over a gangway onto the ferry, and the others followed. Merry then pushed slowly off with a long pole. The Brandywine flowed slow and broad before them. On the other side the bank was steep, and up it a winding path climbed from the further landing. Lamps were twinkling there. Behind loomed up the Buck Hill, and out of it, through stray shrouds of mist, shone many round windows, yellow and red. They were the windows of Brandy Hall, the ancient home of the Brandybucks. Long ago, Gordon Dad Old Buck, head of the Old Buck family, one of the oldest in the Marish, or indeed in the Shire, had crossed the river, which was the original boundary of the land eastwards. He built and excavated Brandy Hall, changed his name to Brandybuck, and settled down to become master of what was virtually a small independent country. His family grew and grew, and after his days continued to grow, until Brandy Hall occupied the whole of the low hill and had 3 large front doors, many side doors, and about 100 windows. The Brandybucks and their numerous dependents then began to burrow and later to build all round about. That was the origin of Buckland, a thickly inhabited strip between the river and the old forest, a sort of colony from the Shire. Its chief village was Bucklebury, clustering in the banks and slopes behind Brandy Hall. The people in the Marish were friendly with the Bucklanders, and the authority of the master of the hall, as the head of the Brandybuck family was called, was still acknowledged by the farmers between Stock and Rushy. But most of the folk of the old Shire regarded the Bucklanders as peculiar, half foreigners as it were, though, as a matter of fact, they were not very different from the other hobbits of the Four Farthings, except in one point. They were fond of boats, and some of them could swim. Their land was originally unprotected from the east, but on that side they had built a hedge, the High Hay. It had been planted many generations ago, and was now thick and tall, for it was constantly tended. It ran all the way from Brandywine Bridge, in a big loop curving away from the river, to Hayes End, where the Withy Windle flowed out of the forest into the Brandywine, well over 20 miles from end to end. But of course, it was not a complete protection. The forest drew close to the hedge in many places. The Bucklanders kept their doors locked after dark, and that also was not usual in the Shire. The ferry boat moved slowly across the water. The Buckland shore drew nearer. Sam was the only member of the party who had not been over the river before. He had a strange feeling as the slow, gurgling stream slipped by. His old life lay behind in the mists. Dark adventure lay in front. He scratched his head, and for a moment had a passing wish that Mr. Frodo could have gone on living quietly at Bag End. The 4 hobbits stepped off the ferry. Merry was tying it up, and Pippin was already leading the pony up the path, when Sam, who had been looking back, as if to take farewell of the Shire, said in a hoarse whisper, "Look back, Mr. Frodo. Do you see anything?" On the far stage, under the distant lamps, they could just make out a figure. It looked like a dark black bundle left behind. But as they looked, it seemed to move and sway this way and that, as if searching the ground. It then crawled, or went crouching, back into the gloom beyond the lamps. "What in the Shire is that?" exclaimed Merry. "Something that is following us," said Frodo. "But don't ask any more now. Let's get away at once." They hurried up the path to the top of the bank, but when they looked back, the far shore was shrouded in mist, and nothing could be seen. "Thank goodness you don't keep any boats on the west bank," said Frodo. "Can horses cross the river?" "They can go 20 miles north to Brandywine Bridge, or they might swim," answered Merry. "Though I never heard of any horse swimming the Brandywine. But what have horses to do with it?" "I'll tell you later. Let's get indoors and then we can talk." "All right. You and Pippin know your way, so I'll just ride on and tell Fatty Bolger that you're coming. We'll see about supper and things." "We had our supper early with Farmer Maggot," said Frodo. "But we could do with another." "You shall have it. Give me that basket," said Merry, and rode ahead into the darkness. It was some distance from the Brandywine to Frodo's new house at Crickhollow. They passed Buck Hill and Brandy Hall on their left, and on the outskirts of Bucklebury struck the main road of Buckland that ran south from the bridge. Half a mile northward along this, they came to a lane opening on their right. This they followed for a couple of miles as it climbed up and down into the country. At last they came to a narrow gate in a thick hedge. Nothing could be seen of the house in the dark. It stood back from the lane in the middle of a wide circle of lawn, surrounded by a belt of low trees inside the outer hedge. Frodo had chosen it because it stood in an out-of-the-way corner of the country, and there were no other dwellings close by. You could get in and out without being noticed. It had been built a long while before by the Brandybucks for the use of guests or members of the family that wished to escape from the crowded life of Brandy Hall for a time. It was an old-fashioned countrified house, as much like a hobbit hole as possible.
Hey, Chris. How you doing, bro?
Upper story, and it had a roof of turf, round windows, and a large round door. As they walked up the green path from the gate, no light was visible. The windows were dark and shuttered. Frodo knocked on the door, and Fatty Bolger opened it. A friendly light streamed out. They slipped in.
Salut Chris, j'espère que tu vas bien.
They slipped in quickly and shut themselves and the light inside. They were in a wide hall with doors on either side. In front of them a passage ran back down the middle of the house. Well, what do you think of it? Asked Merry, coming up the passage. We've done our best in
Merci d'être passé.
a short time to make it look like home. After all, Fatty and I only got here with the last cartload yesterday. Frodo looked round. It did look like home. Many of his own favourite things, or Bilbo's things, that reminded sharply of him in their new set, were arranged as nearly as possible as they had been at Bag End. It was a pleasant, comfortable, welcoming place, and he found himself wishing that he was really coming here to settle down in quiet retirement. It seemed unfair to have put his friends to all this trouble, and he wondered again how he was going to break the news to them that he must leave them so soon, indeed at once. Yet that would have to be done that very night, before they all went to bed. It's delightful, he said with an effort. I hardly feel that I have moved at all. The travellers hung up their cloaks and piled their packs on the floor. Merry led them down the passage and threw open the door at the far end. Firelight came out and a puff of steam. A bath, cried Pippin. Oh, blessed Merry Haddock. Which order shall we go in? Said Frodo. Eldest first or quickest first? You'll be last either way, Master Peregrine. Trust me to arrange things better than that, said Merry. We can't begin life at Crick Hollow with a quarrel over baths. In that room there are 3 tubs and a copper full of boiling water. There are also towels, mats and soap. Get inside and be quick. Merry and Fatty went into the kitchen on the other side of the passage and busied themselves with the final preparations for a late supper. Snatches of competing songs came from the bathroom, mixed with the sound of splashing and wallowing. The voice of Pippin was suddenly lifted up above the others in one of Bilbo's favourite bath songs. Sing, hey for the bath at close of day that washes the weary mud away. A loon is he that will not sing, or water hot is a noble thing. Oh, sweet is the sound of falling rain, and the brook that leaps from hill to plain. But better than rain or rippling streams is water hot that smokes and steams. Oh, water cold we may pour at need down a thirsty throat and be glad indeed. But better is beer if drink we lack, and water hot poured down the back. Oh, water is fair that leaps on high in a fountain wide beneath the sky, but never did fountain sound so sweet as splashing hot water with my feet. There was a terrific splash and a shout of "Whoa!" from Frodo. It appeared that a lot of Pippin's bath.
How's your weekend been,
on high. Merry went to the door. What about supper and beer in the throat? He called. Frodo came out drying his hair. There's so much water in the air that I'm coming into the kitchen to finish, he said. Lawks, said Merry, looking in. The stone floor was swimming. You ought to mop all that up before you get anything to eat, Peregrine, he said. Hurry up, or we shan't wait for you. They had supper in the kitchen on the table near the fire. I suppose
Hell
you
yeah,
three
Chris,
won't
that's
want
good.
mushrooms again, said Frediger without much hope. Yes, we shall, cried Pippin. They're mine, said Frodo. Given to me by Mrs. Maggot, a queen among farmers' wives. Take your greedy hands away, and I'll serve them. Hobbits have a passion for mushrooms, surpassing even the greediest likings of big people. A fact which partly explains young Frodo's long expeditions to the renowned fields of the Madish and the wrath of the injured Maggot. On this occasion there was plenty for all, even according to Hobbit standards. There were also many other things to follow, and when they'd finished, even Fatty Bolger heaved a sigh of content. They pushed back the table and drew chairs round the fire. We'll clear up later, said Merry. Now tell me all about it. I guess that you've been having adventures, which was not quite fair without me. I want a full account, and most of all, I want to know what was the matter with old Maggot, and why he spoke to me like that. He sounded almost as if he was scared, if that is possible. We have all been scared, said Pippin after a pause, in which Frodo stared at the fire and did not speak. You would have been too, if you had been chased for 2 days by black riders. And what are they? Black figures riding on black horses, answered Pippin. If Frodo won't talk, I'll tell you the whole tale from the beginning. He then gave a full account of their journey from the time when they left Hobbiton. Sam gave various supporting nods and exclamations. Frodo remained silent. I should think you were making it all up, said Merry, if I hadn't seen that black shape on the landing stage and heard the queer sound in Maggot's voice. What do you make of it all, Frodo? Cousin Frodo has been very close, said Pippin, but the time has come for him to open out. So far, we've been given nothing more to go on than Farmer Maggot's guess that it has something to do with old Bilbo's treasure. That was only a guess, said Frodo hastily. Maggot does not know anything. Old Maggot is a shrewd fellow, said Merry. A lot goes on behind his round face that doesn't come out in his talk. I've heard that he used to go into the old forest at one time, and he has the reputation of knowing a good many strange things. But you can at least tell us, Frodo, whether you think his guess good or bad. I think, answered Frodo slowly, that it was a good guess as far as it goes. There is a connection with Bilbo's old adventures, and the riders are looking, or perhaps one ought to say searching, for him or for me. I also fear, if you want to know, that it's no joke at all, and that I'm not safe here or anywhere else. He looked round at the windows and walls, as if he was afraid they would suddenly give way. The others looked at him in silence, and exchanged meaning glances among themselves. It's coming out in a minute, whispered Pippin to Merry. Merry nodded. Well, said Frodo at last, sitting up and straightening his back, as if he had made a decision. I can't keep it dark any longer. I've got something to tell you all, but I don't quite know how to begin. I think I could help you, said Merry quietly, by telling you some of it myself. What do you mean, said Frodo, looking at him anxiously. Just this, my dear old Frodo. You're miserable because you don't know how to say goodbye. You meant to leave the Shire, of course, but danger has come on you sooner than you expected, and now you're making up your mind to go at once, and you don't want to. We're very sorry for you. Frodo opened his mouth and shut it again. His look of surprise was so comical that they laughed. Dear old Frodo, said Pippin, did you really think that you'd thrown dust in all our eyes? You haven't been clever enough for that. You've obviously been planning to go and saying farewell to all your haunts all this year since April. We've constantly heard you muttering, shall I ever look down into that valley again, I wonder, and things like that, and pretending that you'd come to the end of your money and actually selling your beloved bag end to those sackful Bagginses and all those close talks with Gandalf. Good heavens, said Frodo. I thought I'd been both careful and clever. I don't know what Gandalf would say. Is all the Shire discussing my departure then? Oh no, said Merry. Don't worry about that. The secret won't keep for long, of course. But at present it is, I think, only known to us conspirators. After all, you must remember that we know you well and are often with you. We can usually guess what you're thinking. I knew Bilbo, too. To tell you the truth, I'd been watching you rather closely ever since he left. I thought you'd go after him sooner or later. Indeed, I expected you to go sooner, and lately we've been very anxious. We've been terrified that you might give us the slip and go off suddenly, all on your own like he did. Ever since this spring, we've kept our eyes open and done a good deal of planning on our own account. You're not going to escape so easily. But I must, said Frodo. It can't be helped, dear friends. It's wretched for us all, but it's no use your trying to keep me. Since you've guessed so much, please help me, and don't hinder me. You don't understand, said Pippin. You must go, and therefore we must too. Merry and I are coming with you. Sam is an excellent fella, and would jump down a dragon's throat to save you, if he didn't trip over his own feet. But you'll need more than one companion in your dangerous adventures. My dear and most beloved hobbits, said Frodo, deeply moved. But I couldn't allow it. I decided that long ago, too. You speak of danger. You don't understand. This is no treasure hunt. No there and back journey. I'm flying from deadly peril into deadly peril. Of course we understand, said Merry firmly. That's why we've decided to come. We know the ring is no laughing matter, but we're going to do our best to help you against the enemy. The ring, said Frodo, now completely amazed. Yes, the ring, said Merry. My dear old hobbit, you don't allow for the inquisitiveness of friends. I've known about the existence of the ring for years, before Bilbo went away, in fact. But since he obviously regarded it as secret, I kept the knowledge in my head until we formed our conspiracy. I didn't know Bilbo, of course, as well as I know you. I was too young, and he was also more careful. But he wasn't careful enough. If you want to know how I first found out, I'll tell you. Go on, said Frodo faintly. It was the Sackville Bagginses' first downfall, as you might expect. One day, a year before the party, I happened to be walking along the road when I saw Bilbo ahead. Suddenly, in the distance, the SBs appeared, coming towards us. Bilbo slowed down, and then, hey presto, he vanished. I was so startled that I hardly had the wits to hide myself in a more ordinary fashion, but I got through the hedge and walked along the field inside. I was peeping through into the road after the SBs had passed, and was looking straight at Bilbo when he suddenly reappeared. I caught a glint of gold as he put something back in his trouser pocket. After that, I kept my eyes open. In fact, I confess I spied. But you must admit that it was very intriguing, and I was only in my teens. I must be the only one in the Shire, besides you, Frodo, that's ever seen the old fellow's secret book. You've read his book, cried Frodo. Good heavens above! Is nothing safe? Not too safe, I should say, said Merry. But I've only had one rapid glance, and that was difficult to get. He never left the book about. I wonder what became of it. I should like another look. Have you got it, Frodo? No, it wasn't a bag ending. He must have taken it away. Well, as I was saying, Merry proceeded, I kept my knowledge to myself till this spring when things got serious. Then we formed our conspiracy, and as we were serious too and meant business, we've not been too scrupulous. You're not a very easy nut to crack, and Gandalf is worse. But if you want to be introduced to our chief investigator, I can produce him. Where is he? Said Frodo, looking round, as if he expected a masked and sinister figure to come out of a cupboard. Step forward, Sam, said Merry, and Sam stood up with a face scarlet up to the ears. Here's our collector of information, and And he collected a lot, I can tell you, before he was finally caught. After which, I may say, he seemed to regard himself as on parole and dried up. Sam, cried Frodo, feeling that amazement could go no further, and quite unable to decide whether he felt angry, amused, relieved, or merely foolish. Yes, sir, said Sam, begging your pardon, sir, but I meant no wrong to you, Mr. Frodo, nor to Mr. Gandalf for that matter. He has some sense, mind you, and when you said go alone, he said no, take someone as you can trust. But it doesn't seem that I can trust anyone, said Frodo. Sam looked at him unhappily. It all depends on what you want, put in Merry. You can trust us to stick to you through thick and thin to the bitter end, and you can trust us to keep any secret of yours closer than you keep it yourself. But you can't trust us to let you face trouble alone and go off without a word. We're your friends, Frodo. Anyway, there it is. We know most of what Gandalf has told you. We know a good deal about the ring. We're horribly afraid, but we're coming with you, or following you like hounds. And after all, sir, added Sam, you did ought to take the elves' advice. Gildor said you should take them as was willing, and you can't deny it. I don't deny it, said Frodo, looking at Sam, who was now grinning. I don't deny it, but I'll never believe you're sleeping again, whether you snore or not. I'll kick your heart to make sure. You are a set of deceitful scoundrels, he said, turning to the others. But bless you, he laughed, getting up and waving his arms. I give in. I'll take Gildor's advice. If the days weren't so dark, I should dance for joy. Even so, I can't help feeling happy. Happier than I've felt for a long time. I dreaded this evening. Good! That's settled! 3 cheers for Captain Frodo and company, they shouted, and they danced round him. Merry and Pippin began a song, which they had apparently got ready for the occasion. It was made on the model of the dwarf song that started Bilbo on his adventure long ago, and went to the same tune. Farewell we call to heart and hall, though wind may blow and rain may fall, we must away ere break of day, are all the woods and mountains fall. To Rivendell, where elves yet dwell, in glades beneath the misty fell, through moor and waste we ride in haste, and whither then we cannot tell. With foes ahead, behind us dread, beneath the sky shall be our bed, until at last our toil be past, our journey done, our errand sped. We must away, we ride before the break of day. Very good, said Frodo, but in that case there are a lot of things to do before we go to bed. Under a roof, for tonight at any rate. Oh, that was poetry, said Pippin. Do you really mean to start before the break of day? I don't know, answered Frodo. I fear those black riders, and I'm sure it's unsafe to stay in one place long, especially in a place to which it's known I was going. Also, Gildor advised me not to wait. But I should very much like to see Gandalf. I could see that even Gildor was disturbed when he heard that Gandalf had never appeared. It really depends on 2 things. How soon could the riders get to Bucklebury, and how soon could we get off? It'll take a good deal of preparation. The answer to the second question, said Merry, is that we could get off in an hour. I've prepared practically everything. There are 6 ponies in the stable across the fields. Stores and tackle are all packed, except for a few extra clothes and the perishable food. It seems to have been a very efficient conspiracy, said Frodo. But what about the Black Riders? Would it be safe to wait 1 day for Gandalf? That all depends on what you think the riders would do. If they found you here, answered Merry, they could have reached here by now, of course, if they weren't stopped at the North Gate, where the hedge runs down to the river bank, just this side of the bridge. The gate guards wouldn't let them through by night, though they might break through. Even in the daylight, they'd try to keep them out, I think. At any rate, until they got a message through to the master of the hall, for they wouldn't like the look of the riders, and would certainly be frightened by them. But of course, Buckland can't resist a determined attack for long, and it's possible that in the morning even a black rider that rode up and asked for Mr. Baggins would be let through. It's pretty generally known that you're coming back to live at Crick Hollow. Frodo sat for a while in thought. I've made up my mind, he said finally. I'm starting tomorrow, as soon as it's light, but I'm not going by road. It would be safer to wait here than that. If I go through the North Gate, my departure from Buckland will be known at once, instead of being secret for several days at least, as it might be. And what's more, the bridge and the East Road near the borders will certainly be watched, whether any rider gets into Buckland or not. We don't know how many there are, but there are at least 2, and possibly more. The only thing to do is to go off in a quite unexpected direction. But that can only mean going into the old forest, said Frediga, horrified. You can't be thinking of doing that. It's quite as dangerous as black riders. Not quite, said Merry. It sounds very desperate, but I believe Frodo's right. It's the only way of getting off without being followed at once. With luck, we might get a considerable start. But you won't have any luck in the old forest, objected Frediga. No one ever has luck in there. You'll get lost. People don't go in there. Oh, yes, they do, said Merry. The Brandybucks go in, occasionally when the fit takes them. We have a private entrance. Frodo went in once, long ago. I've been in several times, usually in daylight, of course, when the trees are sleepy and fairly quiet. Well, do as you think best, said Frediga. I'm more afraid of the old forest than of anything I know about. The stories about it are a nightmare, but my vote hardly counts, as I'm not going on the journey. Still, I am very glad someone is stopping behind who can tell Gandalf what you've done when he turns up, as I'm sure he will before long. Fond as he was of Frodo, Fatty Bolger had no desire to leave the Shire, nor to see what lay outside it. His family came from the East Farthing, from Budgeford in Bridgefields, in fact, but had never been over the Brandywine Bridge. His task, according to the original plans of the conspirators, was to stay behind and deal with inquisitive folk, and to keep up as long as possible the pretense that Mr. Baggins was still living at Crick Hollow. It even brought along some old clothes of Frodo's to help him in playing the part. They little thought how dangerous that part might prove. Excellent, said Frodo when he understood the plan. We couldn't have left any message behind for Gandalf otherwise. I don't know whether these riders can read or not, of course, but I shouldn't have dared to risk a written message in case they got in and searched the house. But if Fatty's willing to hold the fort, and I can be sure of Gandalf knowing the way we've gone, that decides me. I'm going into the old forest first thing tomorrow. Well, that's that, said Pippin. On the whole, I'd rather have our job than Fatty's, waiting here till black riders come. You wait till you're well inside the forest, said Frediga. You'll wish you were back with me before this time tomorrow. It's no good arguing about it any more, said Merry. We've still got to tidy up and put the finishing touches to the packing before we get to bed. I shall call you all before the break of day. When at last he got to bed, Frodo couldn't sleep for some time. His legs ached. He was glad that he was riding in the morning. Eventually he fell into a vague dream in which he seemed to be looking out of a high window over a dark sea of tangled trees. Down below among the roots there was the sound of creatures crawling and snuffling. He felt they would smell him out sooner or later. Then he heard a noise in the distance. At first he thought it was a great wind coming over the leaves of the forest. Then he knew that it was not leaves, but the sound of the sea far off, a sound he had never heard in waking life, though it had often troubled his dreams. Suddenly he found he was out in the open. There were no trees after all. He was on a dark heath, and there was a strange salt smell in the air. Looking up, he saw before him a tall white tower, standing alone on a high ridge. A great desire came over him to climb the tower and see the sea. He started to struggle up the ridge toward the tower, but suddenly a light came in the sky, and there was a noise of thunder. Chapter 6. The Old Forest. Frodo woke suddenly. It was still dark in the room. Merry was standing there with a candle in one hand and banging on the door with the other. "All right, what is it?" said Frodo, still shaken and bewildered. "What is it?" cried Merry. "It's time to get up. It's 4:30 and very foggy. Come on. Sam's already getting breakfast ready. Even Pippin is up. I'm just going to saddle the ponies and fetch the one that's to be the baggage carrier. Wake that sluggard Fatty. At least he must get up and see us off." Soon after 6 o'clock, the 5 hobbits were ready to start. Fatty Bulger was still yawning. They stole quietly out of the house. Merry went in front, leading a laden pony, and took his way along a path that went through a spinney behind the house, and then cut across several fields. The leaves of trees were glistening, and every twig was dripping. The grass was grey with cold dew. Everything was still, and far away noises seemed near and clear. Fowls chattering in the yard, someone closing a door of a distant house. In their shed they found the ponies, sturdy little beasts of the kind loved by hobbits, not speedy, but good for a long day's work. They mounted, and soon they were riding off into the mist, which seemed to open reluctantly before them and close forbiddingly behind them. After riding for about an hour, slowly and without talking, they saw the hedge looming suddenly ahead. It was tall and netted over with silver cobwebs. "How are you going to get through this?" asked Frediger. "Follow me," said Merry, "and you'll see." He turned to the left along the hedge, and soon they came to a point where it bent inwards, running along the lip of a hollow. A cutting had been made at some distance from the hedge, and went sloping gently down into the ground. It had walls of brick at the sides, which rose steadily until suddenly they arched over and formed a tunnel that dived deep under the hedge and came out in the hollow on the other side. Here Fatty Bulger halted. "Goodbye, Frodo," he said. "I wish you weren't going into the forest. I only hope you'll not need rescuing before the day's out. But good luck to you, today and every day." "If there are no worse things ahead than the old forest, I shall be lucky," said Frodo. "Tell Gandalf to hurry along the east road. We shall soon be back on it and going as fast as we can." "Goodbye," they cried, and rode down the slope and disappeared from Frediger's sight into the tunnel. It was dark and damp. At the far end, it was closed by a gate of thick-set iron bars. Merry got down and unlocked the gate, and when they'd all passed through, he pushed it to again. It shut with a clang, and the lock clicked. The sound was ominous. "There," said Merry. "You've left the Shire, and are now outside and on the edge of the old forest." "Are the stories about it true?" asked Pippin. "I don't know what stories you mean," Merry answered. "If you mean the old bogey stories Fatty's nurses used to tell him, about goblins and wolves and things of that sort, I should say no. At any rate, I don't believe them. But the forest is queer. Everything in it very much more alive, more aware of what's going on, so to speak, than things are in the Shire. And the trees don't like strangers. They watch you. They're usually content merely to watch you, as long as daylight lasts, and don't do much. Occasionally, the most unfriendly ones may drop a branch, or stick a root out, or grasp at you with a long trailer. But at night, things can be most alarming, or so I'm told. I've only once or twice been in here after dark, and then only near the hedge. I thought all the trees were whispering to each other, passing news and plots along in an unintelligible language, and the branches swayed and groped without any wind. They do say the trees do actually move, and can surround strangers and hem them in. In fact, long ago they attacked the hedge. They came and planted themselves right by it and leaned over it. But the hobbits came and cut down hundreds of trees and made a great bonfire in the forest and burned all the ground in a long strip east of the hedge. After that, the trees gave up the attack, but they became very unfriendly. There's still a wide, bare space not far inside where the bonfire was made. Is it only the trees that are dangerous? Asked Pippin. There are various queer things living deep in the forest, and on the far side, said Merry. Or at least I've heard so, but I haven't seen any of them. But some things make paths. Whenever one comes inside, one finds open tracks, and they seem to shift and change from time to time in a queer fashion. Not far from this tunnel there is, or was for a long time, the beginning of quite a broad path leading to the bonfire glade, and then on more or less in our direction, east and a little north. That is the path I'm going to try and find. The hobbits now left
1 second,
rode
everyone.
across the white hollow. On the far side was a faint path leading up onto the floor of the forest, 100 yards and more beyond the hedge. But it vanished as soon as it brought them under the trees. Looking back, they could see the dark line of the hedge through the stems of trees that were already thick about them. Looking ahead, they could see only tree trunks of innumerable sizes and shapes, straight or bent, twisted, leaning, squat or slender, smooth or gnarled and branched, and all the stems were green or grey with moss and slimy, shaggy growths. Merry alone seemed fairly cheerful. You'd better lead on and find that path, Frodo said to him. Don't let's lose one another, or forget which way the hedge lies. They picked away among the trees, and their ponies plodded along, carefully avoiding the many rising and interlacing roots. There was no undergrowth. The ground was rising steadily, and as they went forward, it seemed that the trees became taller, darker, and thicker. There was no sound, except an occasional drip of moisture falling through the still leaves. For the moment, there was no whispering or movement among the branches, but they all got an uncomfortable feeling that they were being watched with disapproval, deepening to dislike and even enmity. The feeling steadily grew until they found themselves looking up quickly or glancing back over their shoulders as if they expected a sudden blow. There was not as yet any sign of a path, and the trees seemed constantly to bar their way. Pippin suddenly felt that he could not bear it any longer, and without warning let out a shout. Oi! Oi! He cried. I'm not going to do anything. Just let me pass through, will you? The others halted startled, but the cry fell as if muffled by a heavy curtain. There was no echo or answer, though the wood seemed to become more crowded and more watchful than before. I shouldn't shout if I were you, said Merry. It does more harm than good. Frodo began to wonder if it were possible to find a way through, that it had been right to let the others come into this abominable wood. Merry was looking from side to side, and seemed already uncertain which way to go. Pippin noticed it. It hasn't taken you long to lose us, he said. But at that moment Merry gave a whistle of relief and pointed ahead. Well, he said. These trees do shift. There's the bonfire glade in front of us, or I hope so. But the path to it seems to have moved away. The light grew clearer as they went forward. Suddenly they came out of the trees and found themselves in a wide circular space. There was sky above them, blue and clear to their surprise, but down under the forest roof they'd not been able to see the rising morning and the lifting of the mist. The sun was not, however, high enough yet to shine down into the clear, though its light was on the treetops. The leaves were all thicker and greener about the edges of the glade, enclosing it with an almost solid wall. No tree grew there, only rough grass and many tall plants. Stalky and faded hemlocks, and wood parsley, fireweed seeding into fluffy ashes, and rampant nettles and thistles. A dreary place, but it seemed a charming and cheerful garden after the close forest. The hobbits felt encouraged, and looked up hopefully at the broadening daylight in the sky. At the far side of the glade, there was a break in the wall of trees and a clear path beyond it. They could see it running on into the wood, wide in places and open above, though every now and again the trees drew in and overshadowed it with their dark boughs. Up this path they rode. They were still climbing gently, but they now went much quicker and with better heart, for it seemed to them that the forest had relented and was going to let them pass unhindered after all. But after a while the air began to get hot and stuffy. The trees drew close again on either side, and they could no longer see far ahead. Now stronger than ever, they felt again the ill will of the wood pressing on them. So silent was it that the fall of their ponies' hooves, rustling on dead leaves and occasionally stumbling on hidden roots, seemed to thud in their ears. Frodo tried to sing a song to encourage them, but his voice sank to a murmur. O wanderers in the shadowed land, despair not, for the dark they stand. O woods their beam must end at last, and see the open sun go past. The setting sun, the rising sun, the day's end or the day begun.
Slow down.
For east or west or woods must fail. Fail. Even as he said the word, his voice faded into silence. The air seemed heavy, and the making of words wearisome. Just behind them, a long branch fell from an old overhanging tree with a crash into the path. The trees seemed to close in before them. They don't like all that about ending and failing, said Mary. I shouldn't think any more at present. Wait till we do get to the edge, and then we'll turn and give them a rousing chorus. If he felt any great anxiety, he didn't show it. The others didn't answer. They were depressed. A heavy weight was settling steadily on Frodo's heart. He regretted now with every step forward that he ever thought would be challenging for menacing trees. He was, indeed, just about to stop the dogs going back, if that was still possible, when things took a new turn. The path stopped climbing and became for a while nearly level. The dark trees drew aside, and ahead they could see the path going almost straight forward. Before them, at some distance off, there stood a green hilltop, treeless, rising like a bald head out of the encircling wood. The path seemed to be making directly forward. They now hurried forward again, delighted with the thought of climbing out for a while above the roof of the forest. The path dipped, and then again began to climb upwards, leading to the hillside. And faded into the forest. The wood stood all round the hill like thick hair that ended sharply in a circle. The hobbits led their ponies up, winding round and round until they reached the top. There they stood and gazed about. The air was clear, but hazy.
That was a rough one there.
Near at hand, the mist was now almost gone, though here and there it lay in hollows of the wood, and to the south of them, out of a deep fold cutting right across the forest, the fog still rose like steam or wisps of white smoke. That, said Merry, pointing with his hand, that's the line of the Withywindle. It comes down out of the downs and flows southwest through the midst of the forest to join the Brandywine below. We don't want to go that way. The Withywindle Valley is said to be the clearest part of the centre from which the famous forest, as it were. The others looked in the direction that Merry pointed out, but they could see little but mist in the deep-cut valley, and beyond it, the southern half of the forest faded from view. The sun on the hilltop was now getting hot. It must have been about 11 o'clock. but the autumn haze still prevented them from seeing much in other directions. In the west, they couldn't make out either the line of the hedge or the valley of the brambles. North, where they looked most hopefully, they could see nothing that might be the line of the Great East Road.
Cheers, Chris.
Which they were making. They were on an island in a sea of trees, and the horizon was bold. On the southeastern side, as if the sun were continued far down under the trees, like island shores that rule on the sides of a mountain rising out of deep waters. They sat on the green edge, looked out over the woods below them, while they ate their midday meal. As the sun rose and passed noon, they glimpsed far off in the east the grey-green lines of the downs that lay beyond the old forest on that side. That cheered them greatly. It was good to see a sight of the woods borders, though they didn't mean to go that way if they could help it. The Barrow Downs had as sinister a reputation in Hobbit legend as the forest itself. At length they made up their minds to go on again. The path that had brought them to the hill reappeared on the northward side, but they hadn't followed it far before they became aware that it was bending steadily to the right. Soon it began to descend rapidly, and they heading toward the river, not at all the direction they wished to take. After some discussion, they decided to leave this misleading path and strike northward, for although they hadn't been able to see it, the road must lie that way, and it couldn't be many miles off. Also northward, and to the left of the path, the land seemed to be drier and more open, climbing up to slopes where the trees were thinner, and pines and firs replaced the oaks and ashes and other strange and nameless trees of the denser wood. Their choice seemed they got along at a fair speed, though whenever they got a glimpse of the sun in an open glade, they seemed unaccountably to have veered eastwards. But after a time the trees began to close in again, just where they'd appeared from a distance to be thinner and less tangled. Then deep folds in the ground were discovered unexpectedly, like the ruts of great giant wheels or wide moats and sunken roads long disused and choked with brambles. These lay usually right across their line of march, and could only be crossed down and out again, which was troublesome and difficult for their ponies. Each time they climbed down, they found the hollow filled with thick bushes and matted undergrowth, which somehow wouldn't yield to them, but only gave way when they turned to the right, and they had to go some distance along the bottom before they could find a way up the further bank. Each time they clambered out, the trees seemed deeper and darker, and always to the left and upwards it was most difficult to find a way, and they were forced to the right and downwards. After an hour, they had an all-clear sense of direction, though they knew well enough that they'd long ceased to go northward at all. They were headed off, and were simply following a course chosen for them, eastwards and southwards, into the heart of the forest, and not out of it. The afternoon was wearing away when they scrambled and stumbled into a fold that was wider and deeper than any they had yet met. It was so steep and overhung that it proved impossible to climb out of it again, either forwards or backwards, without leaving their ponies and their baggage behind. All they could do was to follow the fold downwards. The ground grew soft, and in places rocky. Springs appeared in the banks, and soon they found themselves following a brook that trickled and babbled through a reedy bed. It began to fall rapidly, and the brook, growing strong and noisy, flowed and leaped swiftly downhill. They were in a deep, dim-lit gully, overarched by trees high above them. After stumbling along for some way along the stream, they came quite suddenly out of the gloom. As if through a gate, they saw the sunlight before them. Coming to the opening, they found that they had made their way to a cleft in a high, steep bank, almost a cliff. At its feet was a wide space of grass and reeds, and in the distance could be glimpsed another bank almost as steep. A golden afternoon of late sunshine lay warm and drowsy upon the hidden land between. In the midst of it, There wound lazily a dark river of brown water, bordered with ancient willows, arched over with willows, blocked with fallen willows, and flecked with thousands of faded willow leaves. The air was thick with them, fluttering yellow from the branches, for there was a warm and gentle breeze in the valley, and the reeds were rustling, and the willow boughs were creaking. Well, now I have at least some notion of where we are, said Mary. We've come almost in the opposite direction to which we intended. This is the river Withy-Windle. I'll go on and explore. He passed out into the sunshine and disappeared into the long grasses. After a while he reappeared and reported that there was fairly solid ground between the cliff foot and the river. In some places firm turf went down to the water's edge. What's more, he said, there seems to be something like a footpath winding along on this side of the river. If we turn left and follow it, we shall be bound to come out on the east side of the forest eventually. I dare say, said Pippin. That is, if the track goes on so far and doesn't simply lead us into a bog and leave us there. Who made the track, do you suppose, and why? I'm sure it wasn't for our benefit. I'm getting very suspicious of this forest and everything in it, and I begin to believe all the stories about it. And have you any idea how far eastward we should have to go? No, said Mary, I haven't. I don't know in the least how far down the Withy-Windle we are, or who could possibly come here often enough to make a path along it. But there's no other way out that I can see or think of. There being nothing else for it, they filed out, and Mary led them to the path that he'd discovered. Everywhere the reeds and grasses were lush and tall, in places far above their heads, but once found, the path was easy to follow, as it turned and twisted, picking up the sounder ground among the bogs and pools. Here and there it passed over other rills, running down gullies into the Withy-Windle out of the higher forest lands, and at these points there were tree trunks or bundles of brushwood laid carefully across. The hobbits began to feel very hot. There were armies of flies of all kinds buzzing round their ears, and the afternoon sun was burning on their backs. At last they came suddenly into a thin shade, great grey branches. Each step forward became more reluctant than the last. Sleepiness seemed to be creeping out of the ground and up their legs, and falling softly out of the air upon their heads and eyes. Frodo felt his chin go down and his head nod. Just in front of him, Pippin fell forward onto his knees. Frodo halted. It's no good, he heard Mary saying. Can't go on another step without rest. Must have nap. It's cool under the willows. There's flies. Frodo didn't like the sound of this. Come on, he cried. We can't have enough yet. We must get clear of the forest first. But the others were too far gone to care. Beside them, Sam stood yawning and blinking stupidly. Suddenly Frodo himself felt sleep overwhelming him. His head swam. There now seemed hardly a sound in the air. The flies had stopped buzzing. Only a gentle noise on the edge of hearing, a soft fluttering, as of a song half-whispered, seemed to stir in the boughs above. He lifted his heavy eyes and saw leaning over him a huge willow tree, old and hoary. Enormous it looked, its sprawling branches going up like reaching arms with many long-fingered hands, its knotted and twisted trunk gaping in wide fissures that creaked faintly as the boughs moved. The leaves fluttering against the bright sky dazzled him, and he toppled over, lying where he fell upon the grass. Merry and Pippin dragged themselves forward and lay down with their backs to the willow trunk. Behind them the great cracks gaped wide to receive them as the tree swayed and creaked. They looked up at the grey and yellow leaves, moving softly against the light and singing. They shut their eyes, and then it seemed that they could almost hear words, cool words, saying something about water and sleep. They gave themselves up to the spell and fell fast asleep at the foot of the great grey willow. Frodo lay for a while, fighting with the sleep that was overpowering him. Then, with an effort, he struggled to his feet again. He felt a compelling desire for cool water. "Wait for me, Sam," he stammered. "Must bathe feet a minute." Half in a dream, he wandered forward to the riverward side of the tree, where great winding roots grew out into the stream, like gnarled dragonets straining down to the He straddled one of these and paddled his hot feet in the cool brown water, and there he too suddenly fell asleep with his back against the tree. Sam sat down and scratched his head and yawned like a cavern. He was worried. The afternoon was getting late, and he thought this sudden sleepiness uncanny. "There's more behind this than sun and warm air," he muttered to himself. "I don't like this great big tree. I don't trust it. How could it singing about sleep now? This won't do at all." He pulled himself to his feet and staggered off to see what had become of the ponies. He found that two had wandered on a good way along the path, and he just caught them and brought them back toward the others when he heard two noises, one loud and the other soft but very clear. One was a splash of something heavy falling into the water. The other was a noise like the stick of a lock when a door quietly closes fast. He rushed back to the bank. Frodo was in the water close to the edge, and a great tree root seemed to be over him and holding him down, but he was not struggling. Sam gripped him by the jacket and dragged him from under the root, and then with difficulty hauled him onto the bank. Almost at once he woke and coughed and spluttered. "Do you know, Sam," he said at length, "the beastly tree threw me in. I felt it. The big root just twisted round and tipped me in." "You were dreaming, I expect, Mr. Frodo," said Sam. "You shouldn't sit in such a place if you feel sleepy." "What about the others?" Frodo asked. "I wonder what sort of dreams they're having." They went round to the other side of the tree, and then Sam understood the click that he had heard. Pippin had vanished. The crack by which he had laid himself had closed together, so that not a chink could be seen. Merry was trapped. Another crack had closed about his waist. His legs lay outside, but the rest of him was inside a dark opening, the edges of which ripped like a pair of pincers. Frodo and Sam beat first upon the tree trunk where Pippin had lain. Then they struggled frantically to pull open the jaws of the crack that held poor Merry. It was quite useless. "What a foul thing to happen!" cried Frodo wildly. "Why did we ever come into this dreadful forest? I wish we were all back at Crickhollow." He kicked the tree with all his strength, heedless of his own feet. A hardly perceptible shiver ran through the stem and up into the branches. The leaves rustled and whispered, but with the sound now of faint and far-off laughter. "I suppose we haven't got an axe among our luggage, Mr. Frodo," said Sam. "I brought a little hatchet for chopping firewood," said Frodo. "That wouldn't be much use." "Wait a minute," cried Sam, struck by an idea suggested by firewood. "We might do something with fire." "We might," said Frodo doubtfully. "We might succeed in roasting Pippin alive inside." "We might try to hurt or frighten this tree to begin with," said Sam fiercely. "If it don't let them go, I'll have it down if I have to gnaw it." He ran to the ponies and before long came back with 2 tinder boxes and a hatchet. Quickly they gathered dry grass and leaves and bits of bark, and made a pile of broken twigs and chopped sticks. These they heaped against the trunk on the far side of the tree from the prisoners. As soon as Sam had struck a spark into the tinder, it kindled the dry grass, and a flurry of flame and smoke went up. The twigs crackled. Little fingers of fire licked against the dry, scored rind of the ancient tree and scorched it. A tremor ran through the whole willow. The leaves seemed to hiss above their heads with a sound of pain and anger. A loud scream came from Merry, and from far inside the tree they heard Pippin give a muffled yell. "Put it out! Put it out!" cried Merry. "He'll squeeze me in two if you don't. He says so." "Who? What?" shouted Frodo, rushing round to the other side of the tree. "Put it out! Put it out!" begged Merry. The branches of the willow began to sway violently. There was a sound as of a wind rising and spreading outwards to the branches of all the other trees round about. as though they had dropped a stone into the quiet slumber of the river valley and set up ripples of anger that ran out over the whole forest. Sam kicked at the little fire and stamped up the sparks, but Frodo, without any clear idea of why he did so, or what he hoped for, ran along the path crying, "Help! Help! Help!" It seemed to him that he could hardly hear the sound of his own shrill voice. It was blown away from him by the willow wind and drowned in a clamour of leaves as soon as the words left his mouth. He felt desperate, lost and witless. Suddenly he stopped. There was an answer, or so he thought, but it seemed to come from behind him, away down the path further back in the forest. He turned round and listened, and soon there could be no doubt. Someone was singing a song. A deep, glad voice was singing carelessly and happily, but it was singing nonsense.
Hey, dong, merry dong, ring-a-dong, diddle, ring-a-dong, hop along, fell and the willow, Tom, Bob, jolly Tom, Tom, Bombadillo.
Half hopeful and half afraid of some new danger, Frodo and Sam now both stood still. Suddenly, out of a long string of nonsense words, or so they seemed, the voice rose up loud and clear and burst into this song.
Hey, come on, merry doll, derry doll, my darling, light goes the weather wind and the feathered starling, down along on the hill, shining in the sunlight, waiting on the doorstep for the cold starlight. There my pretty lady is, river woman's daughter, slender as a willow one, clearer than the water. Oh, Tom Bombadil, water lilies bringing, comes hopping home again. Can you hear him singing? Hey, come, merry doll, dilly doll and merry oh, goldberry, goldberry, merry yellow berry oh. For old Winderman, you tuck your roots away. Tom's in a hurry now, evening the holiday. Tom's going home again, water lilies bringing. Hey, come, Jerry doll, can you hear me singing?
Frodo and Sam stood as if enchanted. The wind puffed out. The leaves hung silently again on stiff branches. There was another burst of song, and then suddenly, hopping and dancing along the path, there appeared above the reeds an old battered hat with a small crown and a long blue feather stuck in the back. With another hop and a bound, there came into view a man, or so it seemed. At any rate, he was too large and heavy for a hobbit, if not quite tall enough for one of the big people, though he made noise enough for one, stumping along with great yellow boots on his thick legs, and charging through grass and rushes like a cow going down to drink. He had a blue coat and a long brown beard. His eyes were blue and bright, and his face was red as a ripe apple, but creased with 100 wrinkles of laughter. In his hands he carried on a large leaf, as on a tray, a small pile of white water lilies. "Help!" cried Frodo and Sam, running towards him with their hands stretched out. "Whoa! Whoa! Steady there!" cried the old man, holding up one hand, and they stopped short, as if they had been struck stiff. "Now, my little fellows, where be you a-going to, puffing like a bellows? What's the matter here, then? You know who I am. I'm Tom Bombadil. Tell me what's your trouble. Tom's in a hurry now. Don't you crush my lilies." "My friends are caught in the willow tree," cried Frodo, breathless. "Master Merry's been squeezed in a crack," cried Sam. "What?" shouted Tom Bombadil, leaping up in the air. "Old man, not worse than that, eh? That can soon be mended. I know the tune for him, old grey willow man. I'll freeze his marrow cold if he don't behave himself. I'll sing his roots off. I'll sing a wind up and blow leaf and branch away. Old man willow." Setting down his lilies carefully on the grass, he ran to the tree. There he saw Merry's feet still sticking out. The rest had already been drawn further inside. Tom put his mouth to the crack and began singing into it in a low voice. They could not catch the words, but evidently Merry was aroused. His legs began to kick. Tom sprang away, and breaking off a hanging branch, smote the side of the willow with it. "You let them out again, old man willow," he said. "What be you a-thinking of? You should not widening crack. There was a tearing creak, and the other crack split open, and out of it Pippin sprang, as if he had been kicked. Then with a loud snap, both cracks closed fast again. A shudder ran through the tree from root to tip, and complete silence fell. "Thank you," said the hobbits one after the other. Tom Bombadil burst out laughing.
"Well, my little fellows,"
said he, stooping so that he peered into their faces,
"you shall come home with me. The table is all laden with yellow cream, honeycomb, and white bread and butter. Goldberry is waiting. Time enough for questions around the supper table. You follow after me as quick as you are able."
With that he picked up his lilies, and then with a beckoning wave of his hand went hopping and dancing along the path eastward, still singing loudly and nonsensically. Too surprised and too relieved to talk, the hobbits followed after him as fast as they could. But that was not fast enough. Tom soon disappeared in front of them, and the noise of his singing got fainter and further away. Suddenly his voice came floating back to them in a loud halloo.
"Up along, my little friends, up the weary windle. Tom's going on ahead, candles for to kindle. Down west sinks the sun, soon you will be groping. When the night shadows fall, then the door will open. Out of the window panes, light will twinkle yellow. Fear no alder black, need no holy willow. Fear neither nor that, Tom goes on before you. And down, merry down, we'll be waiting for you."
After that the hobbits heard no more. Almost at once the sun seemed to sink into the trees behind them. He thought of the slanting light of evening glittering on the Brandywine River, and the windows of Bucklebury beginning to gleam with hundreds of lights. Great shadows fell across them. Trunks and branches of trees hung dark and threatening over the path. White mists began to rise and curl on the surface of the river and stray about the roots of the trees upon its borders. Out of the very ground at their feet a shadowy steam arose and mingled with the swiftly falling dusk. It became difficult to follow the path, and they were very tired. Their legs seemed leaden. Strange, furtive noises ran among the bushes and reeds on either side of them, and if they looked up to the pale sky, they caught sight of queer gnarled and knobby faces that gloomed dark against the twilight, and leered down at them from the high bank at the edges of the wood. They began to feel that all this country was unreal, and that they were stumbling through an ominous dream that led to no awakening. Just as they felt their feet slowing down to a standstill, they noticed that the ground was gently rising. The water began to murmur. In the darkness they caught the white glimmer of foam where the river flowed over a short fall. Then suddenly the trees came to an end and the mists were left behind. They stepped out from the forest and found a wide sweep of grass welling up before them. The river, now small and swift, was leaping merrily down to meet them, glinting here and there in the light of the stars, which were already shining in the sky. The grass under their feet was smooth and short, as if it had been mown or shaven. The eaves of the forest behind were clipped and trim as a hedge. The path was now plain before them, well tended and bordered with stone. It wound up onto the top of a grassy knoll, now grey under the pale starry night, and there, still high above them on a further slope, they saw the twinkling lights of a house. Down again the path went, and then up again, up a long smooth hillside of turf, tall and bright. Suddenly a wide yellow beam flowed out brightly from a door that was opened. There was Tom Bombadil's house before them, up, down, under hill. Behind it a steep shoulder of the land lay grey and bare, and beyond that the dark shapes of the Barrow Downs stalked away into the eastern night. They all hurried forward, hobbits and ponies. Already half their weariness and all their fears had fallen from them.
"Hey, come, merry dog,"
rolled out the song to greet them.
"Hey, come, dearie dog, hop along, my hearties. Hobbits, ponies all, we are fond of parties. Now let the fun begin, let us sing together."
Then another clear voice, as young and as ancient as spring, like the song of glad water flowing down into the night, from a bright morning in the hills came falling like silver to meet them. Now let the song begin, let us sing together of sun, stars, moon and mist, rain and cloudy weather, light on the budding leaf, dew on the feather, wind on the open field, bells on the heather, breeze by the shady pool, lilies on the water, old Tom Bombadil and the river daughter. And with that song the hobbits stood upon the threshold, and a golden light was all about them. Chapter 7. In the house of Tom Bombadil. The four hobbits stepped over the wide stone threshold and stood still, blinking. They were in a long, low room, filled with the light of lamps swinging from the beams of the roof, and on the table of dark, polished wood stood many candles, tall and yellow, burning brightly.
All right, everyone. I'm gonna call into this live for tonight. See if I can't lay down and get some sleep since I'm actually a little tired. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and we continue to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone, y'all stay safe out there.